legends? Where do they come from? What perpetuates them throughout the years and across multiple cultures? Join us as we explore the depths of our urban legends throughout the years on this edition of Bite Me. I'm Chris Gordon, and joining us again is Lily Hernandez, bringing the Latino vibe to the urban legend. Many movies have been made on the Latino urban legends, so we'll be talking a lot about that. Also with us is Danny J., our producer for DJB Productions, and welcome to another episode of Bite Me.
What a great topic we have today. Urban legends. I mean, this is something that when people needed something to spin, they used to call it spinning a yarn or something like that. It was always something local, something to say, yeah, there's monsters, there's Frankensteins, there's Draculas, whatever. But right here in your little town, in your little neighborhood, there was this, there was that, and this person or this thing would come out at night. And a lot of times it was to get kids to go to sleep. A lot of times it was to get kids to go to sleep. But good luck at that happening, because now these kids are scared shitless and they're in their bed like someone and looking at the thing, and they're like, oh my God, this thing's gonna happen. But what an amazing thing. There was movies that were spawned from urban legends in general. There are many urban legends, which we'll talk about today. The Latina culture, they ran with it. They have so many. It is the God honest truth. They have so many. And that probably does date back to more, I would think, Aztecian, going back to some, in the distant have of the culture above anything else. I mean, of course, in the United States, I'm sure there's Native American cultures that have urban legends. And then there's modern day ones as well. We'll talk about them all today. Lil, you're a professional Mexican on this show today. Tell us.
That's the first time I've ever been called that before.
There you go.
Well, I mean, urban legends go back to the beginning of time. Like you said, they used to call it spinning a yarn. We know them as myths, and we know it as folklore. Back to the oldest civilizations, no matter where you come from or where you've been, there have always been stories of things that have happened. And it's a chance to, at least for us, and I say us like the Latino community, for us, it's a chance to throw some chisme out there. We're always wanting to know the gossip and the stories that are interesting. And it's funny because when you were talking about making kids go to sleep, one of our biggest was the cucuy. My grandma used to tell me all the time that if I didn't go to sleep, that the cucuy was going to come get me. And it was just a monster that lived under your bed, that knew when you were asleep and knew when you were awake, and would come out and like bite your toes.
Sounds like Topo Gigio. Sounds like Santa Claus.
Yeah, but that was one of the big ones. You could ask anybody about the cucuy, and especially here, like I'm in.
Well,
Texas.
I mean, it sounds delicious.
You can say the word cucuy. No, it's not.
It sounds very delicious. I don't know.
You can say the word cucuy, and there are lots of people that are going to have comments and stories about things that their family members have told them.
It just sounds like a big cuddly burrito. I don't know. It just sounds sounds so good right now.
But was it something that you wanted to
now, what is that
come across?
Does that have a translation? Kukoi? Does that have a translation?
It's a monster.
Oh, just a monster. And that was just the name of it? Okay.
The
kukuy. Like it didn't mean like...
There's a movie about the kukuy.
Is it really?
Yes.
Is it really? No shit. I got to look that up now.
Yeah, there's a movie...
Doesn't have subtitles, does it? Because I hate subtitles. I really do. I'm gonna lie.
You know what? I'm not sure if it has.
I can't say. I can't spend time reading stuff.
but it's one of those big things. I'm in San Antonio, Texas, And so there are lots of urban legends. I'm hoping that there are people in San Antonio that watch this that leave things in the comments about the things that we're going to talk about today, just because there's so much culture in San Antonio, and we're a big community, but still small enough to talk about those things and have those experiences as a community, which I think is really cool.
It kind of reminds me, if you watch on Sci-Fi, my daughter got me watching Winona Earp, which was at titles you're like, this is really stupid. It's a sci-fi show on Sci-Fi Channel, and it's it's the granddaughter of Wyatt Earp. She's Winona Earp. They didn't really reach really far with the originality, but instead of her just being like the granddaughter of this, Texas legend, she fights demons, and she fights the underworld with the gun that was made for Wyatt Earp. And apparently in this show, Wyatt Earp also fought demons and blah, 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 which is where he got his folklore of being one of the greatest of all time, blah, 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 this and other thing. So it's a very interesting show in that sense. But this reminds me of that, where it's like, if I go to San Antonio, we could write like an Evil Dead series just out of being in San
Yes.
Antonio.
Yes,
And just
I can take you on a tour. We do it all the time. Well, not right now because we're in
Right.
quarantine, but
Right.
I can take you several places.
That's crazy. That is so crazy. What are some urban legends, I would say, maybe not even so much Latina culture, but maybe just San Antonio, that all the locals that come here are like, oh, you should check out this or check out that?
Okay, so the two that are the most popular are the Donkey Lady and the Tracks. You can just say the Donkey Lady, and people in San Antonio know what you're talking about.
Wow.
So she was a lady. I don't even remember like what year it was, but she was a lady that had a donkey, and her donkey was protective, and she took very good care of this animal, and it bit somebody who was important in the city. Like it bit his son. I want to say it was a politician. I'm not exactly sure, because as urban legends, as they evolve and more people tell them, they change,
Mhm.
just like that,
Right.
Right.
game telephone. So like there are bits and pieces that are different. So the donkey bit somebody's son, somebody that was important in the city, and they either threw her over this bridge, because there are different ways to tell it. They threw her over the old Applewhite Bridge, which is on the south side of San Antonio, and she drowned, and so did the donkey. Or the way that some people tell it, she was burned, like horribly disfigured. They set her and the donkey on fire as retaliation. So
Wow.
the donkey lady is a huge deal in San Antonio, and for a while, I don't know if they still do it, but they had this thing called the Donkey Lady Hotline, and you could call and listen to her story, and it was supposedly her telling you the story. I mean, obviously not, but still, it was supposedly her telling you the story about what happened to her and her urban legend,
For
and
$1.99
how
a minute.
no, it's a
That's a
free
free
phone
line.
number. It's a free phone number. I know the phone number. Like
It
it's a
makes
free phone
it
number, and
makes
I
more
don't know if it still
sense.
works.
I think it makes more sense that they would set her on fire than to be throwing this big ass over a bridge and then her next. Like they're gonna get the donkey over first. I can imagine.
Well, yeah, who knows? But like you used to be able to go to this bridge, and there were people who had paranormal experiences
Wow,
at this bridge where supposedly it happened. And then, things got updated, and then you could call and you could
that's
talk to
crazy.
her, or like you could listen to her talking about it. But she was apparently, like as the story is told, she was a feisty lady, and she was a fighter to the very end, and she thought it was important for people to know what happened to her and hear her story, and so we still talk about it. People in
Now,
San
does she
Antonio
actually
still talk
does,
about the donkey lady.
does she do anything though to you? Like as far as legend would be concerned, if you go to the bridge, does she like kick you in the ass? What does she do?
People have different experiences. I've heard that you can hear the donkey, or that you can hear
Oh,
her like yelling, like for someone to help her.
wow,
And
wow, wow.
like different people have different experiences. Another urban legend that I was talking about was the tracks, and that's something that's interactive. So the urban legend there is these kids were walking along the tracks, a group of kids, and the number changes. Sometimes it's 3 kids, sometimes it's 4 kids, maybe it's 5 kids. There's a number of children, and they're walking along the railroad tracks, and they got hit by the train, or another way that people tell it is they got ran over by a car because they were out late at night and no one could see them. And so the story is that they want to make sure that that never happens to another person. So people in San Antonio will drive to the tracks and park and dust flour on their back bumpers. And if you sit in your car, those children will push your car over the tracks and you can see their handprints on your back bumper.
Wow.
That's a serious thing in San
That's
Antonio.
Wow.
yeah. That's yeah.
That's crazy.
I hope
that is just so
I
crazy.
hope that some of my San Antonians are listening. Please, if you've ever had this experience at the tracks, let us know.
Well,
Because
yeah.
there have
Also,
been
give us
so many
documentation.
people, yes, that have done it. There have been lots of people that have done it. I did it when I was in high school. We felt the car move and we freaked out. And we were just like, oh my gosh, like they're really pushing us over the tracks. And
Wow.
so
Wow.
that's another one that's huge in San Antonio.
Wow.
Crazy. I mean,
That's
up
heavy.
here, like we're out of Philadelphia, and the most we have is like the Jersey Devil, which
I've
for all
been
intents-
called from time to time.
in all intents and purposes is probably
Because
like a rabid badger.
I lived in the Pine Barrens for a
Yeah.
long time. When I came off the road, I retracted to the Pine Barrens.
Right.
And so the story went that I disappeared into the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, which I lived in the Pine Barrens for years. And it turns out, if you get ready for this, the original settlers of the Pine Barrens are my bloodline
Wow.
on both ends. The Kramers and the Sueys, the original settlers of the Pine Barrens, that's my bloodline.
Wow. That's crazy.
That's
So-
incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, so the book came out and I was reading the book and I'm like, oh my, that's my thing. So I contacted my relatives and they're like, yes, that's authenticated. I'm not sure how I feel about saying this, but I'm a Piney by bloodline.
Wow.
So when I went back out on the road, the story that the singer used to say was that we found the Jersey Devil and here he is. And they would introduce me. I'd come out on stage and do my thing. And the Jersey Devil legend is interesting, as you may know. But I will tell you an interesting story if you're okay with this. It's an experience I had. So this is kind of going into the urban legend thing, but it was kind of an experience that I had firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
I was performing in a place called Buna, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And there is nothing in Buna except for this particular venue, this bar, and it's all farmland. So we're performing one night and we're playing, and I'm watching this gentleman out on the floor, and it's line dancing because when I'm playing country music, it's
Right.
a paycheck.
Yeah.
And I'm watching him as I'm playing, and I've never seen anybody move like this in this situation. And he was dancing with a woman, and it was fluid, and it was artistic. It was bizarre to watch. I was like, I've never seen anything like this. So we had a break. So I go outside, just getting some air, and he's there. This guy's standing there. And he's dressed this is going to sound completely crazy, but this is exactly how it happened. I remember it like it was yesterday. He was dressed completely in black with a black brimmed hat, and he's smoking a cigarette. And he turns to me and he goes, I like your playing, son. I was like, thank you. And then as he looked at me, he turns to me. He throws his cigarette down and he smiles at me. And what I saw was an image of something that wasn't quite human. It was a moment where I literally had to hold my breath. I'm like, who am I looking at right now? Because his complexion was that of glass. He had no natural complexion. It looked like he was made of porcelain. And then when he smiled, his teeth looked like they were completely not normal. It wasn't normal. Nothing was normal about this guy. But he was very polite to me. He goes, I like your playing. I'm looking forward to the next dance. And then he goes back inside. I follow him. I never see him again. He disappeared. Never saw him again. I have no idea what happened to this guy. But watching him on that dance floor and what he was doing, and if you were to look at him face to face, I would put him at 68, 69 years old. Until you got up close, then you couldn't tell what his age was. And that's when I said, I just met the Jersey Devil. That's him. And
Wow.
it was almost like a vampire kind of thing. Like, and I'm going off into a tangent here, but my experience with that was unnerving, because again, his elegance and his grace, you hear about vampire movies.
Yeah.
And how Dracula or vampires were very graceful. He had that gracefulness. But when you got up close to him, you're like, there's something not 100% about this guy. And I was like,
That story is fantastic.
I would have thought the Jersey Devil was a rabid badger.
Well, no, that's the thing that they built. They built that idea on it was a goat's head. It had the wings of a bat, and it had they had all this stuff. But what I found fascinating after living in the Pine Barrens for as long as I did, and then going out and doing these shows, I figured the Jersey Devil would not appear that way. Maybe the Jersey Devil could appear in any way he or she wanted to. But what I met that night, and that conversation, and the tone in his vocal cords, everything set me into who I'm talking to right now. This isn't a guy that is. I wish I could explain it better, but
Right.
what I met that night, and I stand behind it to this day. If there is, and I say if in capital letters, if there is such a thing as the Jersey Devil, I met him, and he's actually a very polite gentleman.
It's crazy that you tell that story, and that story is incredible because in 1975 on Halloween, there was a bar in San Antonio called El Camaroncito,
Okay.
and people there said that there was a man who was dressed to the nines, like spitting all kinds of game at all the different women that were in the bar. He was dancing and moved incredibly, fluidly, and used the same terminology. It happened in 1975 on Halloween night. And they said that everyone who was there that night knew that they met the devil because he was there. He was dancing with all the women. He was very charming. And then, so there's two different ways that people tell this story. One is there was a really pretty woman that was dancing with him, and she was having so much fun, and she was just, exhilarated in the experience. And she looked down, and he had chicken feet. But then other people tell it, and that woman looked down, and he had goat hooves. And so that's when everything would change in the story as far as what the situation was. But there are multiple people that were there that night that tell the same story about the same man, and the only thing that's different is when the woman looked down what she saw. But everybody that was there that night was convinced that they met the devil.
That's a very interesting thing that you say that, because you're talking about the feet and you're talking about the hooves and the chicken feet. Okay. So I didn't get to speak to the woman he danced with. I watched them dance. And like I said, I actually lost my place, because I'm watching them and I'm like, and you could tell that she was in awe of what he was doing with her. He was leading. It was great.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But when you say that thing about the hooves, one of the things I recall, one of the vivid memories besides face to face with him, which is extremely vivid, was, and line dancing is an interesting thing, and there is a connection with the devil with line dancing. You go back to Devil Went Down to Georgia. You go into that mythology, this whole idea of the devil in the South and doing his thing. There was one of these moves he kept doing where his foot would hit the floor, and these are dance floors at country bars.
Yeah,
they're made of wood.
Hardwood.
Yes,
yeah.
hardwood.
Mhm.
And it would be just right on the beat, and it would reverberate,
Mhm.
and he would hit that.
And you could feel it.
You would feel it. I was like, oh man, this guy. And I remember looking back at my drummer going, you better keep that beat 100%, because this guy's more on top of it than you are. Like, he was
Right.
so on. But
Oh
it was just his fluidity in his movements and his conviction in everything he did. And then tie that, going back to what you said, it's interesting. Speaking of urban legends, that would make a lot of sense that would be hooves hitting the floor.
Yeah.
That solid
That kind
thing.
of force. Yeah.
That force and that reverberation. And like I said, to this day, I'm convinced I met him. Just in his demeanor and his delivery. It was just so, I'm like, oh dear God.
Those stories are so interesting, and what's crazy is you've never talked to me about this before, and
Nope.
so we're having this conversation for the first time, and there are lots of people in San Antonio that have talked about what happened that night at El Camaroncito.
Wow.
Because it happened in 1975, and so there are a lot of people that still talk about it.
So to put that in perspective, that show in 1975, probably a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
The night that I performed, fast forward to the 90s, probably not as many people.
Right.
Right. So it's interesting. It's almost like, was he hiding out? Like he was out in the 70s and he was like hanging around, and then the 90s came. He's like, yeah, I gotta keep a low profile.
But that's what's cool about urban legends is the seed gets planted wherever, and then it just spreads. And then there are people all over the place that are having similar experiences or telling similar stories. It's fantastic.
Well, you just told me your story, and I told you my story. We just spread it.
Yeah, we're doing it now.
It continues to grow.
But isn't it interesting though that whenever we hear about the underworld or outworld or whatever you want to call it, right, is that it exists outside of time. Okay. And you're talking about 1975. You're talking about 1993, 94, something like that.
Yeah,
right?
It was 1995.
95.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. You're on
so
the
now
right
you're
track.
talking about decades between. Now, to this outer being, if you go by television, now, of course, it's all written by people, whatever. But if you go by the mythology of what that would be, where it exists out of time, they can go 100 years and have it be like an hour. So, you know what I mean? Like, in other words, this could be a night out and then the following weekend. And you're talking, there's a 20-year span in between, in the sense. And now you're talking about, that's where a legend comes from, because it's not happening all the time. It's something where, like, yeah, this happened in 1975, and then you never heard of it again for 20 fucking years later, right? You see what I'm saying? So, like, now
yeah, no, that's a great point, and that's what's fascinating me about Lily's story. Is like she's telling this story about like something that I witnessed, 15 years later. I'm like,
Yeah, and it's a story that people tell in San Antonio.
And you know what?
That's part of the beauty of urban legends, and folklore in general, is being able to tell those stories to other generations, and then they tell those stories, and it just keeps going.
But
And I
isn't it romantic that to think that if this is the devil or whatever the case, not to say not being in Catholicism or whatever you want to believe or whatever,
right.
but isn't it kind of romantic in a sense to say the devil wanted to go out and just have a good time, and he did, you know what I mean, and bedazzled this entire place, which every goddamn vampire that ever goes out has a great time before he blood sucks everybody in the goddamn room. You know what I mean?
Well,
That's
an interesting point. If you're talking about even if you're going to talk about the devil, if we're going to boil it down to the devil himself, there's the romanticism behind that is the idea that it's timeless.
Yeah.
And I think that personally, as us as mortal beings are attracted to the idea of timelessness. Like that's another dichotomy there, because to sit there and say, well, I'd love to live forever, but the other side of you says, oh, man, I'd be bored. Like eventually there's a point where you're like, oh God, I've had enough of this. Where do I go? But the romanticism of say the devil, and let's just say the Jersey Devil for the sake of this particular discussion, was able to reappear and he or she is not that much different than us, has the same appetites, comes up, satisfies the appetites and says, I'll see you in 20, I'll see you in 30, I'll see you whenever I feel like it. There's a beautiful freedom to that. There's an interesting freedom to that. And there's a romanticism to the idea of being able to integrate with a mortal being and still act mortal, which is interesting to see. So going back to San Antonio, having the devil come in and having a dance, and I'm interacting with mortals. I'm not here to do them harm. I'm just having a night out, and I'm not going to be back for another 30, 40 years. So I'm having a night out. I'm having a good time. Hey, you mortals are awesome. See you soon. And there's a romanticism to that. There's a coolness to that. It's like, oh man. And that's it. It's almost like you want to be that person, to have that power to be able to go, it's been 40 years. I feel like a dance and a cocktail. Let's go out.
Well, think about it too. We're mortals. As you said, we're mortals. And isn't our life so mundane, so specific? Let's say there are exacts to life. We're going to live about within 100 years, if we're lucky. Okay. We're gonna go to work, pay taxes, fall in love, fall out of love, have children, die. That's what we're gonna do.
Right.
It's pretty much that's the plan. Whether you want to talk about destiny or not, there is destiny, and that's what it is. It's not romantic like people make it out to be. You're gonna live, you're gonna die. That's the destiny of it. What it is. What you do in between is up to you. Now, isn't it something to say because of that to have something so phenomenal, like a story of a mysterious gentleman with fucking hooves feet and chicken feet and whatever the fuck he's got. You know what I mean? Like, coming in, oh man, he can really dance. But he's like popping around with 3 claws on his feet, whatever. But
he's doing the chicken sound. It's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, how awesome is that? Do we physically need that? I think it's almost like these urban legends feed us because we just want something more than what we have.
And that's why we keep telling the stories. That's how they survive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I think that's exactly right. What you just said is that's why we keep telling the stories, because those stories are important. And I think those stories told, even going back, Lily, going back to that ancestry of those stories from the urban legends from your culture. If those urban legends didn't exist, we wouldn't have comic books. We wouldn't have.
Yeah. We wouldn't have a lot of things. Yes, because
we wouldn't have a lot of things.
Every culture on the planet has their urban legends.
Right.
Every single culture, they've all been telling stories since they began. And in telling those stories, we're sustaining our culture and making sure that the things that make us who we are continue. And we're sharing those with our younger generations and
Absolutely.
continuing our culture and perpetuating our culture. And that's so
And
important.
And let me tell you something. We are assholes because as parents, right? It's so irresponsible to say, oh, I want my kid to go to bed. So I'm going to tell him this scary story is going to scare the shit out of him. So he's awake for the next 16 hours, blah, blah, blah. We're being assholes to these kids just because, I'm going to get back at you because you caused me strife in some way, shape, or form, child. I love you to death. I'll never get out from behind you. But you know what? I had other things to do, you son of a bitch. And now here, dig with this for a while. There's something underneath your bed. Just letting you know. That's a horrible thing.
But he
to
will
say to a
only
child.
come out if you don't go to sleep. So
And
if
then
you
here
go
you
to
go,
sleep,
too.
you're good.
And then here
Yeah,
you go.
but-
too.
You
You
keep
give
fucking
the-
around, then the kukui is
you give the
coming.
kid, you
So
give the
you better
kid
get your
warm
shit
milk.
together.
You give the kid warm milk, so now he's getting he's getting all dopey and shit. And now he knows there's a monster underneath his bed, and he can't stay awake long enough to protect himself. How horrible is that? Jesus Christ!
Oh, we've been
Yeah, but
we've
you
been
know
doing
what?
it for so long.
That same kid,
Yeah.
same kid grows up to be John Carpenter
Or Stan Lee.
or Stan Lee.
Yeah, yeah.
And they express that. So, all experiences that we have in life as young children affect us throughout our life, and it is our choice to take those experiences and make them unique and useful. And whether it's Stan Lee or whether it's John Carpenter, who everything from The Thing, all of the things that he did, it doesn't matter. The bottom line is you take your experience and where can you take it from? And where can I take that? The experience that I had with that gentleman.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Some creepy shit.
The Jersey Devil.
Yeah,
Sorry, that's who I met. I'm not even gonna debate it. Jersey Devil. I met him and I hung out with him. And he inspired so much in me, even though I was terrified.
Another
But that's the
urban
beautiful
legend.
thing is that sometimes being terrified inspires another level
Oh
of
yes.
expression.
Well, yes, because your brain, the way your brain reacts to fear and the creativity process sometimes comes from that place.
Right. Yeah, it's just
Well-
like a broken heart. Your heart gets
Yes.
broken. You write a love song that
Yeah.
is same thing. Fear, it does the same. I think does the same thing to you.
Yes, and your experiences make you who you become, which is why, again, speaking from an urban legend standpoint and from a cultural standpoint, it's so important to keep telling these stories, especially to the younger generations, so that they know where they came from.
Yeah.
I am very appreciative of my grandmother and my great grandmother for telling me these stories and giving me those experiences. That is part of who I am, and that's what I want. I instill the same things with my kids. I need them to know where they came from. This
And that's
stuff
the
is
beautiful.
important.
That's a beautiful thing, because, and I think the tradition in telling those stories is verbal. Getting together with your kids and saying, "Turn the TV off. I have a story to tell you."
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know? And that's such a beautiful tradition that I think should stay. No matter how much technology progresses, at the end of the day, I think it's time to turn it all off. And Lily, like with your children, that's a beautiful thing where you sit down and say, "This is family time. I have a story to tell you." I can almost see that as like a closing to a movie. Children, I have a story to tell you. And what you're doing is you're giving them the story verbally, and that internalizes in them, and that becomes part of them. I don't
Yeah.
think they can get. I don't think they can get that from a screen. They can't get that from a recording.
No, of course
They're going to
not.
get that from you.
Right. And when it comes from my grandmother, it's even more powerful. Because my grandmother, thankfully, is still around and still
Oh well,
tells us
there you
stories.
go.
I want to thank Lily for being on the show today. We're going to thank my good friend Chris Gordon for being on the show today, and for
Thank you for having
everybody
me.
out there, absolutely for everybody out there. Till next time, turn on the lights.